Gothic seating will again change as we're moving ahead in history. New ideas, new ornamentation, well, new everything. And we see the development of the back stool. Now, the Gothic stool will tend to be three-legged as opposed to four. The reason is with three legs, you can set a stool down on an uneven surface and it's going to sit better than if you have four. And it's just like that table that you get at a restaurant or a bar where it rocks back and forth, and you always have to alter one of the legs, throwing, a folded up napkin under it or something like that. When you have three legs, that doesn't happen. You don't get that rocking form. Well, eventually what's going to happen is you're going to see that third leg in the back, and oftentimes the seats will be triangular. So the example I found was octagonal, but oftentimes they're triangular with the long side in the front and then the narrow side in the back. So something along these lines going back this way. And the reason is, of course, it makes a lot of sense with three legs to have a triangular seat. It's also fairly comfortable because you don't put your butt way back here. It's usually up here. But what they will do is they will slowly start building a back onto it. At first, a very short back, but again, it slowly enlarges. And what we have is a very simple form of chair. It's much more comfortable than what you have with a stool. I can, of course, sit and lean back, and it works out in a very elegant form. It's an interestingly modern form that we don't tend to associate with the Gothic. If I were to give you a more modernized version of this today, you wouldn't place its origin necessarily. So a very interesting one to think about. Now we also see boarded stools, and we're going to see joint stools as well. Now a boarded stool is built by a carpenter, usually with large pieces of board, which is what we see here. We have the front and back. We see a top and two legs. The front and back act as stringers, stopping those legs from falling outside, moving out and dropping the occupant ungracefully onto the ground. Oftentimes, this would also be storage space. You could easily put a drawer or something underneath here. In this case, it's not, it's decorative, but you get the idea. A joint stool is made by a joiner. And the difference is that a joiner joins wood in a workshop, whereas carpenters tend to construct the building elements on site. And here we see turned legs, something that we tend to see from joiners a lot. And everything is about putting individual pieces together. So we have the lathe work. Now, we've had lathe work well back into the medieval. Even the Greeks and the Romans had some very simple lathe work. They have stringers at the bottom to hold the legs together, but then they have added an apron. Now, this is something we're going to see a lot moving forward. The apron holds together at the base of the seat so that the seat is just sitting on top of a frame, usually attached in some way, either wooden dowels or glue or whatever else. But the apron makes it more stable because now I have an attachment at the top as well as at the bottom of the leg. So this is a stool that's going to withstand the test of time. We will see the development of benches, oftentimes based on pews. And these benches are really useful. This is developing from that couchette that we saw in the Romanesque. They've built up the sides, and here we have big, solid sides. You can tell this is not something that's meant to move much. And a big, solid back on it. Now, interestingly, they would often put these in front of the fire whenever possible because that back would allow the radiant heat coming from the fire to reflect back onto whoever's sitting on the bench. And from this bench form, you can see how we're going to get to the modern day couch. Of course, evolution takes different steps, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. And we see some of those Gothic motifs. So here's a quatrefoil. Here's a four-leaf flower, square flower. So we've got a lot of those styles developing and showing in the furniture. We will see chairs, choir stall chairs, commonly. Of course, chairs of estate and such are still there. But the choir stall chairs, based on the chairs that you would have seen in the church choir, which is the section of the church, as you remember, behind the altar. The members of the choir would have sat on benches. Eventually, those will develop into chairs over time, and eventually they find their way into the secular world. Here again, very similar to what we saw with the bench. In fact, it's basically a very narrow bench with a high back, a solid back. The arms are solid. You're basically sitting on a large box. This is meant to be handed down. This is meant to be used heavily. Rather than something dainty that's there for artistic purposes. But of course, in the Gothic, they've got that pragmatic mindset. They want things to last. We will again see the Faldstool, the folding chair, which has been haunting us ever since the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians. This style just keeps coming up. And what we're going to see the Gothic do is it's going to become more and more ornamental. It's also going to fold less and less. Here we see it folds into a very large package. And eventually these will simply become chairs that do not fold. It becomes a style. So they're taking that Roman idea of the folding curulus and they're developing it into a standardized chair. Again, a symbol of status, connecting you to the Romans. Why do I want to do that in the Gothic? Because everyone in the Gothic and the Romanesque and the medieval looks up to the Romans. And so the more that I can connect myself to the Romans through even my knowledge of furniture, the more educated, the higher my status. And this is always going to be a positive thing. In fact, this form, the Faldstool, will continue into the Renaissance as well. So you are not going to get away from it. But it's always going to serve that purpose. At one point, it will become sort of a simple chair, but it's always going to show status, at least after the Romans, basing it off of those magistrate chairs.